Grandpa stole his first buggy in 1892. I met your grandma pig slopping in 46.
Oh, every Christmas we'd visit my Uncle Fred in prison.
And welcome, America, to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Boy, we got some great guests today, as always. Really excited to be hearing from Joanne Jesse from Wisconsin. She is a genie who, during the pandemic, made an amazing find concerning the previous pandemic. 100 years earlier, it's involving a swap of some great family history stuff with another family. You're going to want to hear all about this coming up in about 10 minutes. Then later in the show, from our sponsors over at Legacy Tree Genealogist, Ryan Rockwood is going to be here talking about the mother lode of family records waiting for Japanese Americans in Japan. He'll tell you the history of it and what you might expect to find in that. Hey, if you haven't signed up for our weekly Genie newsletter, we'd love to have you. We keep you up to date on all kinds of things you don't necessarily hear on the show. Plus, we give you links to past and present shows and stories you'll appreciate as a family historian. Right now, it's off to Boston, where David Allen Lambert is standing by, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. Hello, David.
Hey, how you doing?
I am hanging in there. Thank you very much. Boy, we got a lot of news to cover this week in Family Histoire News.
Well, we definitely do, but I want to just first give a shout out to all the ladies of the DAR who gave me a warm welcome, and many of them are Extreme Genes listeners. I was in D.C. this week giving a lecture at a genealogy conference they held, so I was very pleased to hear they like Extreme Genes. You know, you never know what you're going to find when you buy a house. You know, you think an old house, the attic, or finding something out in an outbuilding might be kind of fun. How about a house only built a few years ago? Well, the owner died, and the new owner's grandson was taking a bag out of a closet to go shopping because it was hanging on a hook.
Right.
And revealed a secret passage leading to stairs to a basement with dozens upon dozens of boxes. It was all the former owner's stuff, clothing, photographs, and memorabilia dating back from the 1960s.
Oh, that's crazy. How fun is that?
It is. I mean, maybe there's a Mickey Mantle rookie baseball card or something in there, but they've contacted the family of the deceased, and they are going to come by and see what they want. And the grandparents who had bought the house really don't feel comfortable with selling the stuff of the former owner.
Right.
So who's to say what's going to happen to all of it? Well, you know, you never know what you're going to find when you go beachcombing. Well, in Michigan, about 14 years ago, they found a jawbone. And thanks to DNA and the genealogy work of the DNA Doe Project, they have identified a fisherman who disappeared back in 2000. At least there was some closure to the family wondering what happened to him. So obviously he did drown. But this is a person who died 22 years ago.
Amazing.
Actually given some closure to it. You know, you never know, again, where you're going to find things. And over in Israel, in the village of Ma'ilya, there's a gentleman who was working and doing a little bit of renovating in his house, and they know there was Crusader Castle ruins nearby. Well, under his house was the church, and a mosaic with a Byzantine-style floor and passageways and all that.
Whoa.
Are all right there. But here's the thing. The community is so interested in this almost 1,000-year-old historical site, they've raised tens of thousands of dollars to actually have it restored and archaeological work done. So
incredible.
You just never know what you're going to dig up.
This is amazing. First of all, we get the home with the hidden basement. Now we got the home with the hidden Crusader church under it. What else do you have here?
How many years did you work before you retired?
Oh, 52.
Okay, well, you don't have Walter Othman, who lives in Santa Catarina, Brazil. Pete Fish, he's been working since January 17th, 1938 for the same company.
Oh, wow.
This 100-year-old Brazilian breaks the record according to the Guinness Book of World Records, and he still hasn't retired yet.
Amazing. That's a good one. And then we got another story this week about the new oldest person in the world, and it looks like that number just keeps going up.
It does. Well, Kane Tanaka passed away earlier in April. She was the oldest person in the world. She was living in Japan. This lady is now the ripe old age of 118. She's a French nun known as Sister Andre. She has been a nun since World War II. She became a nun in 1944, and she is now the oldest known living person in the world. And she was born in 1904. And stop to think of it. How many of us knew people born well before 1904?
Yeah, a lot.
That's pretty amazing. 118 years. So happy belated birthday, and may you have many, many more. Well, I got one more story I thought I'd share with you, and this is called mudlarking. In London, you may have walked along the breakwater of the Thames. And this is what people do. And you can find pottery dating back to the medieval time, even find Roman items. I find a lot of things when I go there.
Well, didn't you find pipe stems and things like that?
I did. I found pipe stems, including a pipe that dated back to about the 1640s, still whole, which was amazing. Well, here's something from the 17th century somebody picked up, and this golden artifact is called a memento mori ring. These are the rings. You sometimes see them in probates where they give you a mourning ring to memorialize the deceased. And inside of it, it says M. Farrington, 21 August 75. Well, through the work of the internet, one of his followers figured out exactly who Maria Farrington was, who died on the 21st of August, 1675. Now, because it's gold under the Treasure Act in Britain, he has to turn this into the British government, and they'll decide whether he gets to keep it.
Wow. Now, I remember there was a ring that was found in Massachusetts that went back kind of to that same period, but this person actually got to keep it because it was in his own yard. Little different rules.
Exactly. Well, that's all I have for this week from Beantown. Remember, if you're not a member of American Ancestors, would love to have you become one, and you can use the coupon code EXTREME for Extreme Genes, and you can save $20 on AmericanAncestors.org.
All right, David, thank you so much. Coming up next, we're going to talk to a Wisconsin genie, Joanne Jesse. During the pandemic, she made an incredible find concerning the previous pandemic. You'll want to hear this story coming up next in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show.
Unknown parentage, lineage society membership, building your family tree, leaving a legacy. Regardless of your reasons for hiring a professional researcher, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you discover your family's past. Their genealogists are highly rated in their field with specialties in DNA analysis, historical context, and forensic genealogy. For nearly 20 years, Legacy Tree Genealogists have created thousands of professionally bound and digital reports for families like yours around the world. So whether you've hit a brick wall in your research or are just getting started, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you tell your story and preserve it for generations to come. To receive a free estimate for professional research, visit legacytree.com or call 1-800-818-1476. That's 1-800-818-1476. We'd be happy to talk to you. Legacy Tree Genealogists.
Hey Genies, Ancestry now has an exclusive partnership with PhotoMine, the leader in photo scanning and archiving. What does this mean to you? Well, imagine inheriting an old photo album and you want to digitize all the images. Up until now, you'd have to remove the pictures, place them in a scanner, crop them, and perhaps use Photoshop to improve them. Now, by using these amazing PhotoMine tools from Ancestry, you can use your phone to take a picture of an entire page from your album. The tools will automatically separate and crop each picture, improve focus, and restore color or colorize your images. Then you can assign which picture goes to which person on your tree. If you've been waiting years to get around to the tedious project of scanning your old albums, it's been worth the wait. No more pulling your photo albums apart and trying to reinsert the pictures back in proper order. No more tearing of your old photos while removing them from those so-called magnetic albums of the 1970s. Sign in to Ancestry through their mobile app to try it out. Hey Genies, it's Fisher here, and my shiny new ExtremeGenes.com website has been described as having that new car smell. I love hearing that. Having been with you for over 8 years now, it felt like time to help out listeners and followers who need to know the basics of genealogical research, as well as how to understand your DNA test results, and to be able to put them to work for you, breaking down brick walls, identifying birth parents, locating new cousins who may have photos and information that can't be found anywhere else, and verifying your paper trails. Yes, DNA can do all that, and I can show you how. Check out the all-new ExtremeGenes.com website and download the free Genealogy Strategy Roadmap and the free DNA Starter Guide. Then, if you like what you see, you can take those next steps to sign up for the video courses that you can watch at your leisure. I'll take you through all the basics, step by step. Find out more now at ExtremeGenes.com. All right, back at it on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And the pandemic has caused a lot of people to think back to the one 100 years ago, because they're still within memory. There's still a lot of records, photographs, of course, dominant from that time period. And my next guest got into it and made a haul of a discovery. She's Joanne Jesse. She's from Waukesha, Wisconsin. And Joanne, welcome to Extreme Genes. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So how did all this start? Your head has obviously gone back 100 years or so.
Yes, my maternal grandma, Jean, she had 2 aunts that she lost that I knew of during the 1918 flu pandemic. And so after being in lockdown for several weeks myself, I decided to start looking into this. My mom and my aunt have been the caretakers of a hoarder and genealogist's dream of pictures and letters and scrapbooks.
Nice.
on that side. And it's been just something that I was able to dig into. So I had copies of everything that my mom had scanned over the period of several years. And I decided, let's figure out, who did we really lose? And was it more than just the 2 sisters? And that's kind of where this all began.
Sure, and where the circumstances were around that. The stories of the siblings are a part of the stories of your directs as well, I think, because of all the interaction and the relationships. So what happened?
Right.
I see, as you've prepared me for some of this, there was really kind of a step-by-step as this progressed, and it was fascinating.
Yes. So on May 3rd, I documented who I thought was everybody who had passed away as a result of the Spanish flu. And that included my great-grandmother's daughter, her father-in-law, her 2 sisters, and her brother.
Oh. Wow.
I later discovered that there was also a half-nephew who was part of this loss as well. So that was obviously more than I realized of family members who had been lost during the pandemic. And who knows, there could even be more that I didn't realize about. But there was one in particular, Anne. I found out that we had her whole scrapbook and letters that her husband had sent her from France during World War I to her.
Wow. So this all ties back to the war as well.
Yes. So Anne met a man named Stuart, and in 1916, they started dating. And he registered for the draft in June of 1917 and got drafted pretty much right away. By August, his name had been drawn. And so they ended up getting married August 15th, 1917, before he went pretty much right away to Fort Sheridan in Illinois for the 2nd Reserve Officers Training Camp. And by January 13th of 1918, he was on his way to Liverpool, where he would then join up with the AEF in France. So they didn't have a lot of time together from when they got married to when he was deployed.
Right. No children. No children, right. You can tell from some of the letters that I've seen that they definitely wanted children. So yeah, they were separated pretty much right away, and they wrote many, many letters to each other. We know this because they numbered their letters. You're into the 200s. Sometimes there'd be multiple letters going in a day. Stuart went to France in January of 1918, and then in October is when they had their 2-year dating anniversary. Okay.
And it just so happens that the day before that is when we discovered through this whole adventure that she had contracted the flu the day before that. And things kind of progressed quickly from there.
So as a result of all this, then, you knew that you had certain information that you could develop from there. But you went even further than that, because I know that the survivor, this Stewart, he went out and got married again after she passed away, right?
Right. So I decided on May 13th to see, does Stewart have any descendants? So I went on Ancestry and found someone who had his name in her tree. So I sent her a message saying, I'm related to his first wife who died in the pandemic. And we have copies of the letters that he sent to Anne while he was in France. And I was wondering if you knew anyone else in the family, and on a real long shot, if anybody knew if her letters to him had been kept. So within 5 days, I had heard back from the second cousin of Stewart's granddaughter. And she said, oh my goodness, we know Stewart very well because he and his second wife only had one daughter. We spent holidays with him and his grandchildren growing up. And I'm going to work on connecting you with 4 grandchildren.
That's a good start.
Yeah. I was amazed to hear back so quickly in the first place. And then it just kept going faster and faster from there. One of Stewart's granddaughters, who I've been in contact with the most, she had a copy of his memoir that was transcribed by the local library back in 1975.
Oh,
and
wow.
It turns out when everything started in March with the shutdowns and everything, they all remembered Stewart's first wife had died of the Spanish flu in 1918. So she was just reading the little bit in his memoir that discussed that. I think she also had some photos of the couple. They loved their grandmother so much, they never really gave much thought to his first wife, kind of out of reverence and respect for their grandmother. But at the same time, they had kept all these things. So she reached out to her brother, and it turns out that he did have the letters from Anne to Stewart in France during World War I.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that was on May 24th. We discovered that.
What a haul. So
right.
Did he scan them? Did he give them to you? How did that work?
He scanned them so that we could take a look, and he did that really quite quickly, I would say. It turns out he also had a couple of the telegrams that arrived way after she died, actually, trying to let him know that she was sick and that she had eventually passed away. He notes later in his memoir and other places that the lines with the cables were just jammed and messages were not getting through at that time. But in addition to the letters, they actually had a detailed letter from one of their friends who was actually the doctor who took care of her and her sister. Those 2 sisters died 1 day apart. Oh. And he gave a very detailed account of how they were doing leading up to their passing. It's just astonishing. Fevers over 105.
Oh my gosh.
Things like that.
Awful.
So,
well, when you consider that he survived long enough to write his memoir and include all this information in there, and then you have the letters he wrote, and then they have the letters that she wrote, you're able to put this entire century-old story together the way you have. And for a lot of people who pass away without having any descendants, any children, they're just kind of forgotten as that aunt back there or that sibling that died young or something like that. But they're real people now with all the information that you have.
Yes, and it's been really interesting to see. I mean, Rockford, Illinois, where they all grew up, is not very small. I think the population is well over 100,000. But my maternal grandma, Jean, she was connected to the family of Stewart's second wife throughout her life. In fact, I think we have a wedding invitation to Stewart's daughter's wedding from the 1950s.
Okay.
And my mom and her siblings were classmates with a lot of his nieces and nephews. I don't think they knew his grandchildren per se, but they knew the other people in the family. And they also were in some of the same friend circles. For example, there was a famous architect in Rockford named Jesse Barloga that they were all friends with. So it's just kind of interesting how they watched each other throughout their lives. I mean, part of the record that my family kept was a newspaper clipping from 1970 showing Stewart. He was a painter, and, they thought enough to save this article where it mentions how he didn't find out about his wife's death until weeks later.
So he was still family then?
Yeah, I don't know if they directly spent time together, but they kept track of each other.
Sure, right. Of course. He had been part of the family at one time many years earlier. That's amazing. What a great find. How did it make you feel when you discovered all this information? And what are you going to do with it?
Well, when I especially figured out that Stewart was still writing letters to Anne after she had passed away, she died on October 19th, and he was still mailing letters on November 3rd. Obviously, there's a delay in the mail, but I think he was involved in the telegraph office even. But the fact that he hadn't received any information over the cables was kind of shocking. So that just made me feel so heartsick that he had gotten word that she was sick, but he had had no updates after that.
And this is just like a week before the end of World War I.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't even thought about
November
that.
November 11th.
Yes. Yeah. That makes it even more surprising. I hadn't layered in that history with this. But basically, the next step is I've talked with my family members, and Elizabetta has talked with her family members, and we decided that since they don't have any children together, that we are going to swap our sets of letters, which seems a little bit strange that Anne, who wrote the letters, will have her letters back, and they'll have Stewart's letters back with their family. But at the same time, there's little tidbits and morsels in there about their friends and family at home, or from his end, what it was like in France. He was going on about fleas and things. They had a flea problem for a while. He himself actually had a slight attack of Spanish influenza around the same time that she did. So we thought that that would be the way that we decide to preserve this family history. Yeah.
Are you writing up the story?
Well, I feel like I'm well on my way I was putting a timeline together last night. We've got letters, we've got newspaper articles. The information is there. It's just a matter of how it will come together and when.
Great stuff, Joanne. Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
What a great story. And coming up next, project manager Ryan Rockwood from Legacy Tree Genealogist talking about the motherlode of family records waiting for Japanese descendants. He'll tell you all about it coming up next on Extreme Genes. And welcome back to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. And longtime listeners may remember back in 2015 when I visited with Olympic skater Apollo Anton Ono about his Japanese ancestry. And he talked about this holy grail of research facilities over in Japan that he accessed in his past. And it was a pretty amazing thing to hear about. And, of course, Apollo's enthusiasm for it. If you missed it, by the way, it's episode 115. And on the line with me today is a project manager over at Legacy Tree Genealogists, our great sponsors, Ryan Rockwood. And Ryan specializes in working on Asian projects and overseeing Japanese genealogy, in particular for Japanese Americans. And Ryan, welcome to Extreme Genes. Great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be with you.
So how long have you been doing this?
My decision to kind of specialize in Japanese genealogy technically started back in 2014. I was living there as a volunteer representative for my church doing missionary work, and I noticed that there was all these different people of all these different backgrounds within Japan that I talked to. Culturally, a huge center of their culture was learning about their family and remembering and reverencing their ancestors. I was so impressed by it, but I felt like in America, it's an industry. We have all these different companies, and it's a kind of a full-fledged industry with resources. Whereas over there, I didn't feel like there was much of an industry, but rather the culture. And I just thought, I feel like we can tie this together, and then we can utilize the cultural focus of genealogy there but tie in the American industry and really help people of Japanese descent find their ancestors.
Interesting. Well, tell us about this holy grail of records over in Japan. I know they've got an amazing record set there. I don't know how far back it goes, what all it covers. Explain the whole thing. What's it called?
So it's called the Koseki. I guess the longer version would be Koseki Tohon. Like you said, yeah, it's a family register. So whereas in America and other countries, a lot of our records are tied to an individual and they're tied to an event. So one person's birth, one person's death, a couple's marriage, things like that. In Japan, the difference is it's not necessarily tied to an event where it's actually tied to the entire family. So this Koseki is a register for one family where you have the head of the household, you have the wife, and because the head of the household is almost always a male.
Sure.
And then you have their children. And throughout the life of each individual in that family, the record is updated with each one of those events. So what you get is you get a full record that has the birth, the marriage, the death, any adoption, even location where they lived. All that information is on one record for the entire family. So It's pretty incredible.
Wow, I guess so. And so the question would be then, are there privacy concerns? How long has it been going on?
Yeah. So, and that is kind of the unfortunate part. Is it's once you get it, it's amazing, but it's difficult to get because of some of those privacy concerns.
Okay.
So what happened is this record was instituted across Japan in around 1872.
Okay.
This is when Japan was they were kind of coming out of the samurai era, and they were getting more modernized. They had been in what's called the Meiji period, which was kind of their modernization, westernization period. And so this was kind of an attempt to have a civil registry where they could have a more established, modernized government with a register of everyone. And so it started in 1872, where every person in Japan had to register themselves as part of a family with a surname in a given name. Before then, there was even a time where people didn't even have a surname. Only the samurai had surnames. So this was a big event where everyone had a name, everyone had a registered domicile, everyone had a family, and that was in 1872. Now, it went great for 100 years, and unfortunately, it was actually in the 1970s, 1976 to be exact, there was, like you said, there was these privacy concerns where even though as a society they had modernized as far as their political and social structure, culturally there was still a lot of baggage from the samurai period where they had a bit of a caste system. So samurai at the top and then whittling your way down even to, this term wasn't used, but it's easier for us to understand. You know, in India, we know of the untouchables, right? So they even had a caste similar to that there. And so even though it was 100 years, more than 100 years before, even in the 70s, there was this problem where employers, colleges, even families of potential spouses would look up the Koseki records of potential employees, potential students, potential quarters, and find out, oh, this person is in a samurai class. This person is of a lower class. And there would be blackmail. There would be discrimination. And it became a huge problem. So it's so unfortunate that 1976, there became this restriction where you actually, only a descendant of someone on the Koseki record could request it directly. You could not access it publicly.
So are you saying that they don't maintain it any longer in terms of keeping it current?
Good question. So no, it's still kept current. The only time there is some record loss where if every single member on a certain Koseki document has either died or been married or adopted off, there has been cases where those records have been destroyed, which is really unfortunate. The Japanese government has been doing a lot of things to make sure that they're digitized, and the system is now, obviously, it's completely digital. But rather than record loss, it's mostly restriction of, you know, a researcher can't just go in and find a client's records online or even find it through an on-site without a power of attorney, without the actual client being able to go in and prove their lineage and do it directly that way.
And that's where you come in.
Exactly. And so that's something that we specialize in, is we have on-site researchers in Japan that are obviously highly specialized in this. And me as a project manager, as I work with the client to make sure that we first, get all the information they already have. Second, do any kind of other immigration research that we need to do here to kind of get some of those information from the immigration records and things like that of the immigrant ancestor. That once we do that and we kind of hit that roadblock of, okay, we've gone as far as we can in America and now everything else is in Japan, then we're able to then work with our on-site and they can go into the specific municipal courts, because you actually need to go to the municipal office where the record is housed. So it's not only that you have to go to any government entity, you have to know the specific municipal office that it's tied to. And then our on-site researchers get that, and they translate them, and we send them off to our clients.
Wow. And so basically, your people already have a relationship with the government and that trust so that you can get in there once you get all the paperwork taken care of.
Exactly. And I guess even more than a maybe organization to organization relationship between us and the government, it's really that they have, this system, albeit strict, there is a way to make it work. And we just have people on the ground that have done it, and they do it over and over and over. And
sure.
They know the questions to ask. They know the places to go and the things to provide where we can work within that system. It's been pretty amazing. We've hit certain roadblocks, and then my on-site researcher will say, well, I've got some ideas. Let me, I know that it looks on paper, we can't get it, but let me try some things. And then they're able to, talk to the right person, ask the right question. And it's pretty amazing what we're able to find.
It's interesting. 1872, that's kind of right around the same general area where we started birth, death, and marriage records here in the United States. Maybe a little early for some places, but kind of on track with, say, New York City. And it looks like just a lot of people around the world at the same time were starting to think about these things.
It is. It's so fascinating. And you even going a little bit further back to the 1850 census, right? Everything before that, there was only head of household.
Yep.
And it was around 1850 where they started actually adding the members. It's the same kind of thing. Before that 1860, 1870 range, all you had were the samurai class. But then moving on from there, every individual was accounted for. So I can't tell you what it is, but it's kind of cool that was the era.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. He is Ryan Rockwood. He is a project manager over at our sponsors, Legacy Tree Genealogist. Ryan, great stuff. Thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I love listening to the podcast. I'm happy to be on.
All right. And coming up next, David Allen Lambert will rejoin me as we go through another round of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Genies, if you haven't done so yet, you've got to check out Ancestry.com's new storytelling creation center, Ancestry Stories. Their story builder allows you to create a story with 6 different slide types, including a title page, a photo display page, including stock pictures they provide, and documents. And you can write a summary. And with those photos, you can add motion, panning left to right or right to left. For now, these stories can only be created on your iPhone, but Android is still to come and can be saved to your ancestors' pages on your trees. You can then access via phone, and in time, it'll appear on your desktop. You can also share it with family members and friends, whether or not they subscribe to Ancestry.com. For the younger generation that wants stories in a quick and easy-to-consume form, you can't beat this. I've already shared a story with my family, and the reactions are remarkable. Try out these incredible new tools and share your new story creations on social media using hashtag #MyAncestryStory.
Unknown parentage, lineage society membership, building your family tree, leaving a legacy. Regardless of your reasons for hiring a professional researcher, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you discover your family's past. Their genealogists are highly rated in their field with specialties in DNA analysis, historical context, and forensic genealogy. For nearly 20 years, Legacy Tree Genealogists have created thousands of professionally bound and digital reports for families like yours around the world. So whether you've hit a brick wall in your research or are just getting started, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you tell your story and preserve it for generations to come. To receive a free estimate for professional research, visit legacytree.com or call 1-800-818-1476. That's 1-800-818-1476. We'd be happy to talk to you. Legacy Tree Genealogists.
Hey Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. All right, we are back. It is Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. David Allen Lambert is on the line. And David, our first question is from Marco in Louisville, Kentucky. And he says, guys, in a Civil War letter, it was mentioned that my ancestor had a wooden grave marker. But when I visited his burial site in Virginia, his marker was stone. When would the wooden one have been traded out? Interesting question. I've seen wooden ones. They're absolutely amazing that they survive so long. But what do you have to add to this, Dave?
Well, I mean, first off, the thing about the wooden markers is that's what they originally used. In fact, quartermasters from the time of the Revolutionary War at military posts and camps, nobody was going to be carving out a stone marker for you right away. The problem is that the lifetime of these type of markers, fish, is only about 5 years before the paint comes off and you can't read them, and then this wood eventually rots. So that's why a lot of the early colonial stones would have been wooden stones. These are called like headboards or like a wooden marker of sorts. So they're described a couple of different ways. So around 1873, the Quartermaster General's office petitions Congress, and they appropriate over $1 million to have gravestones either in marble or granite cut to a certain specification to replace all these wooden markers, because the cost to replace them every few years would have been astronomical. So might as well get it done once. You're able to find a great collection of these applications, if you will. If someone was going to have a marker after the fact, if they didn't die in the Civil War and they died a few years later, well, in 1879, these markers through about 1903, you can find a database on Ancestry.com, and these are the original headstone applications, which sometimes give you a little bit more information that's actually on the stone. Some of these stones, they didn't record more than the first initial, the last name, and the vessel that you served on, if you're in the Navy or the Marines, or the company and the regiment you served with in the Army. Now, the application sometimes has full names, sometimes has dates of birth, dates of death.
Right.
So you wouldn't know right away if you're looking at a gravestone from someone from the Indian Wars or who served in the Civil War, especially if it's an old stone that was put there in the 1880s or 1890s. So you have to do a little bit of sleuthing to find that out. But you can find those online. The other thing is there are great websites like Find a Grave and Billion Graves, and another one that a lot of people don't use, interment.net, which has an entire section on American veteran cemeteries that you can search, and it has a lot of the national cemeteries right by state. And it's exclusively veterans instead of having to go through everybody on, say, Billion Graves or Find a Grave. So that's a nice option, too.
Yeah, that's amazing. You know, I've actually visited a ghost town near Zion National Park in southern Utah. It's called Grafton. And this is where a lot of the scenes with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were filmed back in 1969. And they have a cemetery there with a lot of wooden markers. Now, I was thinking about what you're saying. A lot of these would only last 5 years, but I would think in the dry heat of Utah, they last a lot longer because they're still there from the 1870s, 1880s, early 1900s. Some of them talk about being killed in clashes with the natives. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing stuff to actually run into these things. I don't think I've ever seen them anywhere else. And certainly the whole time I was growing up living in the East, I never saw a wooden marker there. Did you?
The only time I've ever seen them are in Boot Hill out in Tombstone, Arizona.
Wow. Well, there you go. So it's the dry air and the heat, and for some reason they survive for a long, long, long time. So who would have imagined that? I totally get it. 5 years would make sense, especially in the humidity of the east and especially the extreme temperature ranges in the winters and the summers. So that is a great question. Marco, thanks for that. And Dave, great answer. Thank you so much. We've got another question coming up for you in moments when we return on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, we're back. It's Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. I am Fisher. He is David. And Dave, our second question comes from Becky in Pleasant Grove, Utah. And she says, guys, in my grandmother's effects, I found an old photo of a woman with a mirror-like finish. It's really clear. When would this date back to, and how might I find out who she is? Becky, good question. What do you think, Dave? You want to start that out?
Well, that right away would be a daguerreotype.
Yep.
That mirror type finish is essentially the emulsion is on polished metal. And if you get that mirror image, it's almost like you can see your own reflection in the face of your ancestor.
Yeah, and they really are clear. There's no question about it. These really date back to the 1840s and 50s for the most part. They were very expensive for people to get. It was like $5 to do one, which was the average pay for a week's worth of work for somebody back in those times. And I would also recommend that you look up the clothing. Maureen Taylor has a great book that helps you match up the era with the clothing that you might find in the picture. One other thing that I hesitate to recommend this because it could become a bigger problem than it's worth. But I inherited a bunch of these 8 years ago. We actually had 9 from the same family, which was incredible, as I'm told from many people who are experts in this field. But I was taking them apart so I could scan them because they're behind glass, they're in a frame. And I found that behind some of these pictures was actually written who they are on, on a note or on something behind it. And then we'd have to put the whole thing back together. But unsealing it after 150, 160 years could cause a problem. Now, I have not had any problems with these since I did that 8 years ago. Still, I'm not expert enough to say, oh, this is definitely something you should risk. But that might be one way you could figure out who it is. The other thing, of course, David, is to kind of figure out what branch of the family this came from in the first place, if you can, and see who the possibilities are. What is the age of the person in the picture? And kind of go from there.
You know, with the photograph, just to add caution to it, you can remove the image, may it be a daguerreotype or the later ones, which are done on glass, which are ambrotypes. Occasionally, you'll find that it is all encased, the glass, the metal plate, or the glass and the negative positive plate, and it's wrapped. As long as you don't peel back and break the seal, the emulsion is going to not affect to air. What happens with the daguerreotypes is if you open them up and remove the glass over the daguerreotype for a long length of time, it will tarnish because it's a silver plate.
Right.
Just like an old piece of silverware. You just opened air to it. So it's always good to just leave it as it is. Maybe get a professional person to photograph it if your cell phone isn't doing the trick or your scanner. But these are treasures. I opened one out of the back and it had a lock of the person's hair.
Oh, wow. Really? I've never heard of that before. So, that's interesting.
DNA.
Yep. And did they identify who the person was as well, or was just the lock of hair?
Just a lock of hair. Just a very pretty young girl in a green dress because the daguerreotype was tinted. And it's a beautiful image. And it's one of the ones I own, I purchased. So I always got curious. I'm like, I wonder what it says back there. Because sometimes you can date them with a photographer because they used to put their little advertisement piece, or sometimes on the metal plate, which is the matting around the actual image. You may get the name of the photographer, date it by a city directory, and you'll know how old the photo is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are certain things you can do, but you got to do them with caution. And there are maybe hidden secrets within this treasure that you've got. So congratulations on that. And thanks for the question, Becky. And that's Ask Us Anything for this week. Thanks, David. We'll talk to you next time around.
All right. Until then, my friend.
All right, buddy. And that's our show for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, if you missed any of it or you want to catch it again, of course, listen for the podcast. You can find it on all the standard places where great podcasts are found. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you again next week. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.